Personal stories matter. I think they make history more real and more interesting. So I want to start today's episode with a couple of my personal memories that I have back from the very end of the USSR and the beginning of the independent Ukraine that was still very much economically and culturally influenced by the collapse of the USSR. So one of my earliest childhood memories is me and my mom standing in a very long queue. It was winter, it was getting dark really quickly, there were lots of snow around and we were standing in that cold trying to buy a couple of packs of butter. Another memory is of green bananas. They were deficit and someone brought them to me and I was small and not to eat. Too many of them, they were hidden somewhere in the flat and I was trying to sniff them and get one more. Bananas were for holidays and they were rarely for holidays, just like tangerines. And the last memory is already from my early school years. These were in the independent Ukraine and I had a fur coat. It looked like a small teddy bear, brownish. The problem is that like half of the children in my class had similar coats. And to identify it in a wardrobe, my mom had to fix some red beads on it so that I can easily recognize my coat. The rest were pretty similar because we did not have much choice in clothes, in food products, in services that we get and who them provide. Was the USSR a land of plenty or a land of deficit? Let's look into that. Soviet plan economy failed very quickly. It was based on absence of competition, fixed prices and total state control over production and trade, and as a result led to low quality, no need for advertisement design, and absence of competition among producers and traders. Fixed low prices always lead to deficit. So perhaps very quickly you will see that Soviet Union that wanted to look like the land of plenty on so many informational campaigns abroad was the land of deficit. And deficit is one of the words that I firstly associate with the USSR. Remembering queues and panic that was during the first weeks of COVID pandemics, how people were trying to buy everything to protect their families from any kind of deficit, those toilet paper queues and all of that, I can tell you that Ukrainians and many people who lived in the Soviet Union were 100% more prepared for the situation like that, because queues, fighting and trying to find something that is totally absent on the market is a typical experience of an ex-Soviet citizen. Sometimes problems in various spheres of life led to total absence of a particular product. For example, there were years when women could not buy tights, or there were years when toilet paper was a deficit and the majority of people substituted it, I don't want to tell you, but I have to, with newspapers. Trying to demonstrate equality, Soviet Union always demonstrated inequality. And this inequality with product and services supply was very vivid and based on different features. For example, let's look at geographical inequalities that existed in the sphere of consumer supplies. There were different spheres that were divided according to the priority of people living there, perhaps. The first, the second, the third, and the fourth. The cities of the first priority were the capitals like Moscow or St. Petersburg, some Republican capitals, and popular resorts. They were visited by many people, both from various Soviet republics and also from abroad, and they had to demonstrate the picture of plenty. That's why their shops were full with goods. Popular goods consumer tours appeared at that time, and there were lots of trains coming from peripheral cities to the capitals or to other industrial cities to buy some basic products like meat like butter, like condensed milk. We're not talking about something fashionable, clothes, or something complicated, something technological. No, basic products. For example, my parents remember the time when it was almost impossible to buy a chicken in our city, in the western part of Ukraine, and it was easy to find Ukrainian chicken in Moscow supermarkets. Social inequality was also very vivid in Soviet communist society. There were special shops for communist elite party leaders where they had access to various goods and clothes that came from abroad. The quality was checked. Also, people who work in trade became extremely influential. Because of the deficit, they were able to hide, to keep the goods that are important or needed by many people, and then to sell them for a specific price or for a specific service. That's why influential people had always contacts with the trade workers, and trade workers became very influential people in the equal communist society of the USSR. Another thing that was caused by the plan economics and the deficit of goods is their low quality. Because if you did not have access to the choice and the supply and demand did not correspond to each other, people were eager to buy goods of a lower quality. And there is even a specific word that appeared at that time, which is difficult to translate into English, but it meant something of a wide consumerism level, like shirpotreb. It was created for a wide range of people very quickly and at a very low quality. And there are lots of jokes and stories that describe how you buy something in the shop and then you have to take it to a service directly, for example, a car, to make it fixed, even before driving for the first time. When I think about these unique features that may be still unknown to you about the trade in the Soviet Union, one of the first things that comes to my mind are various cards and tickets that people received on their working places. And in the times of deficit, these tickets and cards limited the number of products they could buy. There were specific norms of things that you can buy during a month, and these cards gave you access to that. In the poorest years, they were also accompanied by a card of a buyer, so that you can buy these things, but only within your city, to prevent people from periphery, for example, coming to Moscow and buying more, thus creating a deeper deficit. Imagine that at your working place you receive a number of cards that allow you to buy half a kilo of sausage, 2 packs of butter, which is close to 400 grams, and that's not a lot for a month, a limited number of bottles of condensed milk, or something like that. No freedom even in your kitchen. Another symbol of Soviet period for me are long queues. They took a huge part of your personal time. And there were really long queues, for example, that included 8,000 people. And it did not mean that standing in a queue will give you an opportunity to buy something, because you could have spent days waiting for the access to the counter. It was very common for people to substitute each other. For example, your family members will substitute you in a queue, not to lose its place and still have the ability to buy something that you need. Later appeared a specific category of people who were professional queue standards. And there were jokes like you can spend some time in a queue and earn even more than working as a teacher or as an engineer. So people simply sold these places. And there appeared a mafia, if it's possible to call so, people who controlled queues. And the state also controlled your place of living, because not all people were allowed to buy deficit goods. So, for example, you could spend a few days standing in a queue that is thousands of people long, and then realize that you're not allowed to buy something because you don't come from the city you were standing in a queue. It was also typical to stand for hours, to come to a counter and to want to buy, 3 bottles of wine, and then you realize that only 2 bottles of wine are allowed to one person. Sometimes people cooperated to deceive the state, but it looks so miserable. These queues, they existed not only for groceries and other stuff that we buy to eat or to wear, but they were present, for example, in the sphere of automobiles. Cars were always a deficit in the Soviet Union, and sometimes people had to put themselves in the lists that provided them future access to the possibility to buy a car. And in some places, in some regions, you had to wait 12 years to have a possibility to buy a car. Not to get a car, but to buy a car. To wait 12 years to have the access. And this list, they existed on various factories and plants, and sometimes people didn't want to quit just because their time on the list was approaching. Knowing this problem, knowing how many goods lack, Soviet Union continued to export its cars, its appliances, and even its food products that were absent from the inner market to pretend that the USSR is a country of plenty. So its own citizens did not have access to many of the goods they needed, and many of these goods were exported to Soviet or communist countries or countries of the Eastern Bloc to demonstrate the strength and prosperity of the USSR. And another phenomenon that I have to mention on this episode is the black market that appeared back in that times. Many shop assistants, many trade workers realized the power they have over customers and started selling things behind the counter or from the backyard, which led to lots of loud cases, but at the same time created the background for corruption that now is in the heart of Russia and Putin's regime. I know you can say from time to time every nation experiences deficit in something particular. But when we look at the products that were deficit in the USSR, we will realize that these are very popular, very simple products like meat, like milk, like wine, like coffee, like chocolate, like fruit coming from other countries, TVs, washing machines, lots of clothes, shoes, perfumes, soap, TV sets, video recorders, and many other things. The death of the Soviet Union was marked by empty counters and window screens. And this is something that I personally remember. When you come to a shop and inside of that shop there is nothing, just a shop assistant to inform you, like, no, we don't have butter. It was also very common to cover all the counter with just one product that was brought to a shop. And it looked very unusual. I have found one joke that I want to tell you right now, back from that period. A man comes to a shop and asks, "Do you have meat?" And she says, "No, we don't have fish in this department, and they don't have meat in that department." It very vividly describes the absence of everything in the shops and the depth of the deficit of goods, the deficit of services, and of course the deficit of information. Every country can have a problem, an economical, a cultural. Deficit is something that happens from time to time in different societies. But instead of working on its own problems, Soviet Union wanted to continue and to pretend that it is a land of plenty, not trying to solve internal problems, but trying to create external problems and to develop this image of the country of plenty. Today we all know it is not true. One of the most disgusting experiences of this Russian war in Ukraine are videos and examples of poor Russian soldiers looting Ukrainian houses and flats. They steal everything, starting from clothes, appliances, and finishing even with food products like Nutella. It demonstrates how poor Russian society is, both materially and mentally. And they send these packages of stolen, looted goods to their Russian homes, thinking that can bring them happiness. Soviet Union was the land of deficit, so is Russia. Russia is also the mother of corruption that many of ex-Soviet republics suffer from. We have to fight that together with Soviet myths that still exist in the modern global informational environment. My name is Anna, and I want to stop the deficit of knowledge about the dark and gloomy period of Soviet Union that still fuels Russian military machine.